Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Sunday, November 9th, 2025, and today we are going to be talking about the Democratic Party's pathway to a Senate majority in the 2026 Senate elections. After Tuesday's elections, we've seen a lot of questions surrounding not just the House races, which Democrats have often felt quite bullish about, but instead the Senate elections that have seemed far too out of reach for the past year. In election prediction after election prediction, I have never once predicted that Democrats would win control of the U.S. Senate, and I want to emphasize that as we embark on this journey of understanding how do Democrats get there to the majority, is that I'm not saying that I believe that they will, but I am saying that what Tuesday's election results showed me was a result that could be conducive to Democrats winning on the national level, given that we were working with a national environment that was roughly Democrat +7, Democrat +8 on the national level, which again could result in a midterm map that could be quite good for the Democratic Party. Now, on your screen right now are all 35 races ranging from Maine to Alaska to Florida to Oregon that are all up in the 2026 midterms. For the sake of this video, I'm not going to waste your time. We're going to fill in all of the states that are currently considered to be safe for either political party, or at least not the ones that would be necessary on either side for us to really explore, what the pathway looks like, given that we can generally expect them to go in one way or the other. And so as we fill in this map here, what you will find is that Republicans do have, based off numbers, an advantage at baseline. They come into this with the vice presidency, which means of the remaining 9 quote-unquote toss-up races, which, to be fair with you, would take the best case scenario for Democrats to even make these races competitive in the first place. But just in exploring what the options are for the Democratic Party, of the 9 races, Republicans just need a third of them to win Senate control, given that they have the vice presidency, meaning they'd maintain roughly at 50-50, which would still give them another 2 years to do confirmations in the U.S. Senate in favor of Donald Trump's appointees, another 2 years to go forward with whatever the Senate would decide to do. Even in some cases, let's say they get rid of the filibuster, could just steamroll if Republicans maintain control of the House. And so the numbers here are not on the side of the Democratic Party. And let's say Republicans, run the board and win all of these seats, well, the Democrats would be at the least amount of seats they've seen in the 21st century when it comes down to U.S. Senate elections. But again, getting back to the point of, Democrats getting to the majority, let's not talk about doom and gloom scenarios. Let's talk about the rosy fields and the way that Democrats could get to a legislative majority, not just in the House, which would certainly come if they were winning the Senate, but again, on this side of the nation's capital. And so the 9 races here that are the most important, I think that what we know at baseline is the Democrats currently hold 3 of them. They hold New Hampshire, Georgia, and Michigan. It goes without saying that if Democrats are looking for a substantive way back to the majority, not only would they need to win these seats, they would need to do so by a comfortable margin. And a Democratic +7 national environment might suggest that that's possible, right? Looking at the last, presidential election, Kamala Harris lost the state of Georgia by 2 points, lost the state of Michigan by 1.5 points, and won the state of New Hampshire. And so it stands to reason that, if we're taking Democrats have, won nationally by, Republicans won the popular vote by 1.5. If Democrats are winning by what they did on Tuesday, which is a margin here of roughly 7, you're shifting the map by, roughly 9.5 points, or 8.5 points rather. Let's go ahead and do that. And then you can start to see why it's a bit more reasonable to say, okay, well then Georgia, Michigan, and New Hampshire could, in theory, be likely states for the Democratic Party. But that doesn't get them there just yet, right? Those states just bring the Democrats to 47. But I'm actually not too far off from saying that that's a possibility, right? Georgia's Public Service Commissioner results showed that, seats that have been held by the GOP for decades, and in some cases, one of the seats that flipped to the Democrats was being held by a Republican since 2011. We'll get this. On Tuesday, flipped to the Democrats, not just by a little bit. This is a statewide race, by the way, in Georgia. They won it by 25 points. I mean, you are talking about astronomical margins when Republicans don't pay attention to the races. No doubt in my mind, they will pay attention to the Georgia Senate race. They're already investing tens of millions of dollars in it, sure. But at the same time, what we have found from it is that ultimately, the Democratic Party, looking at Georgia, looking at Michigan, looking at New Hampshire, under the right circumstances, can certainly do as well as we are saying on this map. So that brings the Democrats to 47, Republicans now even with them there, 6 remaining toss-up races. Well, if you know anything about the Senate races so far, you'll know that the 2 primary targets for Democrats right now, by extension, Ohio, but that even then, those 3 states don't give you the majority, are Maine and North Carolina. These are two states that in the last presidential, Maine went to Kamala Harris by roughly 7 points, and the North Carolina race went to Donald Trump by roughly 3 points. Democrats have a very strong recruit in North Carolina. In Maine, it's a little bit more choppy to even see who the Democratic frontrunner is. The Democratic Governor Janet Mills has already announced that she's running in this race, and Graham Plattner, who has now been more scandal-plagued as of late, is also in this race too, and it's a very competitive primary up there. But the point is that they are facing off not just against any random Republican. If it was that case, no matter who the nominee was, it would be a likely state for the Democrats at baseline. They're running against an electoral juggernaut who has had decades of service in the state of Maine and decades of consistent overperformance in favor of the Republican Party. And so seeing that, it is very possible that, this race is more of a toss-up. But again, if we are talking about a 2025 margin, well, get this. Maine would be a Democratic state regardless of who they nominate if Democrats are, in fact, winning by such a deafening margin on the national level. And so what that would mean is that Maine would have to jump over, and North Carolina, which Democrats actually could. I could see them winning it by 6 points under the right circumstances. Michael Whatley is not a strong Republican. Roy Cooper is an exceptionally strong Democrat, but I am working within the boundaries of understanding North Carolina is North Carolina. Maine, I think, is just going to be a little bit closer because of Susan Collins. In either case, that brings the Democrats to 49 and the Republicans to 47. With 4 remaining toss-up races, we're working with a map here that is not amazing for the Democrats, but now you can start to see, all right, if they're at 49, they now need 2 out of the remaining 4 toss-up races. But the reason why I wanted to get through the majority of, what is necessary for Democrats is because early on in the video is because we know Michigan and Georgia and North Carolina and Maine quite well. At least if you watch this channel or watch electoral politics a little bit closer than the average person, you'll know why these races are more in favor of the Democratic Party. The rest of these are a bit more convoluted. I think the first and obvious answer out of the 4 remaining, which ones that Democrats believe would be the most competitive, is the state of Ohio. And it's not just for vibes. Ohio is a state that in the last presidential election, Donald Trump won by roughly 11 points, but in the Senate race, Bernie Moreno only defeated Sherrod Brown, the incumbent Democratic senator at the time, who's, get this, now running for Senate in 2026, by roughly 4 points. And so the margin here being 3.5 versus 11 points across the state showed that Sherrod Brown was able to overperform relative to the national ticket here by roughly 7 points. Pretty substantial, 7.5 points in favor of the Democrats. This is under a Republican plus 1.5 national environment, by the way. If Democrats were to win by 7 nationally, it stands to reason that they could get in there in the state of Ohio. I think if Democrats are to find a way to a governing majority, it comes through Ohio as well. But even then, again, remainder, Iowa, Alaska, and Texas, Democrats do not get the majority. J.D. Vance breaks that tie, and it brings them to a point where Republicans, could still govern as normal, at least on the side of the U.S. Senate. And so it really jumps down to Iowa, Texas, and Alaska, states we haven't arguably talked about as much, but certainly deserve some attention, because these are races that if Democrats want to find a serious pathway to the Senate majority, it goes through one of these states. Now, the question really is, okay, which one of these states is the easiest for the Democrats? I think that there are 3 options here. The 2 that come out to me as the most obvious, where I do think that we've already floated top names, and we know that should one of these candidates enter into the race, the state immediately becomes closer to a toss-up rather than what it is right now as a solid and likely Republican state, and that is the state of Alaska and the state of Texas. Now, Iowa we'll get to in just a moment, but I want us to unpack first about what's happening in the state of Alaska. This is a state where Democrats do not have a candidate so far, but Mary Peltola, the former congresswoman who won, in 2022 by 10 points and then lost in 2024 by just 2, even though Kamala Harris was losing the state by 14, outrunning the top of the ticket by 12 percentage points, seems to be openly toying with the idea that she wants to run not just for Congress again, but instead for the higher chamber, to run for United States Senate. And the thing about Alaska, unlike many other states, is that Alaska is small enough that their House district is the same as their Senate district. Why? Because it has 1 congressional district, which means it's a statewide race, whether she runs for governor, whether she runs for representative, whether she runs for senator. It is all the same election, no matter what. And so that's why it's quite good for Mary Peltola if she wants to go for higher office, because she certainly wants to make a return to public service. She's been very adamant about that. But it seems that she's considering running for governor or running for senator. And governor seems like a much easier lift. But at the end of the day, if she can win statewide in one race, it stands to reason she can win statewide in another. And while it won't be a guarantee, I don't think that if she enters into the race, it starts off as a favorite for the Democrats. But if she was to do it, Democrats could seriously get to a Senate majority through a narrow victory in Alaska if Republicans hold on to Iowa and Texas by the margin that right now they are presently expected to do so. But let's say Mary Peltola doesn't run. Now you know one of the pathways. Alaska, Ohio, North Carolina, Georgia, Maine, Michigan, right, needing to win those states. Let's say Alaska, Dan Sullivan's in the race, and Mary Peltola says, I'm not running. I want to jump over to run for governor. All right. Where do you find it now? Well, let's reset. Let's go back to Iowa and Texas, and let's look at it that way. Two states that are certainly in consideration for the Democratic Party, but I think one more than the other. And it might be the harder one in terms of fundraising and just sheer mass. But it is one that could be high risk, high reward for the Democratic Party. And that is the state of Texas. Now, Texas is of unique interest to Democrats because, especially after Tuesday's results, we saw that Latino voters went from exit polling data in 2024 of backing, Kamala Harris by 5 on the national level to, in New Jersey and Virginia, backing the Democrats there by 33 points, and 20 points in margins across these states. And so what we saw was that a lot of these majority Hispanic Trump precincts swung, some cases, 15 to 40 points in favor of the Democratic Party in 2025. And so what we know, too, is that during Trump won, Texas was at its most malleable point to vote for Democrats. Because in 2024, Donald Trump won Texas by 14. But get this, the Senate race that coincided with that election only went to Ted Cruz by 9. And I'm reminded of the 2020 presidential election when Biden only lost Texas by 5.6%. Joe Biden got nearly 47% of the vote in Texas. And in 2018, the Senate race there, with Ted Cruz again, was decided by just 2.6% across the state. So, it stands to reason that if the Democrats get the right candidate, which in my opinion easily is James Tallarico in this race, and Republicans nominate the wrong one, which the most recent data point says it's going to be Ken Paxton in the vote split, then a runoff could be Ken Paxton as well, is that 2026's result here is that if the Democrats are in the right circumstance against the right Republican with the right Democrat and the perfect storm on the national level surrounding Donald Trump and a massive reversion amongst Latino voters across Texas, it could happen. I'm not saying that it will, but if Democrats were to find a way to do it, it would have to be in 2026 alone. And it would be Texas that puts Democrats narrowly over that finish line, and Iowa can vote as it may. And so that brings us to option 2. Ohio, Texas, North Carolina, and Maine would all have to flip for Democrats to see it happen. The final result is, let's say this. Let's say John Cornyn is the Republican nominee and Democrats nominate Colin Allred. I think Texas would stand to be slightly more competitive than in 2024, maybe a 7-point margin, but still one that Republicans can rely on. Well, that leaves us down to one final possibility, assuming everything else again goes correctly, and that is the state of Iowa, which right now is not on many people's radar, but arguably should be. The reason why we haven't focused as much on Iowa recently is because the bad Republican here, which was Joni Ernst, who was first elected in 2014 to make him squeal, 2020 reelected, underperforming Trump, and then in 2026 was so unpopular, she on her own accord. I mean, she's not that old. When you look at her age, I believe right now, how old is she? She's 55 years old. I mean, she could stay in office. I mean, we have senators who are in their 90s, right? But again, the point isn't that she is aging out and wants to take a step back. I'm sure she'll get a cushiony lobbyist gig, right, in D.C. But maybe at Heritage, whatever, right, Project 2029, I don't know. But the point is that in Iowa, she knows she's so unpopular that she is making that decision not to lose re-election, but to not even seek it at all. And so she decided that she was not going to run. This prompted Ashley Hinson, who actually has been historically an overperformer in Iowa's 2nd district. Donald Trump won this district by 10, but when it came down to the 2024 race, she won by 16. She's extraordinary for the district. When you take a look, at least in terms of margin and performance, she stands to reason that she could do well across the state, but Democrats have a list of candidates here right now. Zach Walz, Josh Turek. I mean, you have names here that are quite interesting across the state. Nathan Sage, who's also running too. I mean, a lot of people across Iowa on the Democratic side here who do not fit the standard of nationalized Democrat, who I think could arguably do well across Iowa in a general election. Now, especially with Rob Sands running, it could be interesting, but the data suggests it still would be quite in favor of the GOP. But let's say, right, as these tariffs continue to harm rural Americans, Iowa is one of the states that has seen it the worst. Joni Ernst is unpopular, but so is Kim Reynolds, the Republican who's retiring from the governorship too, because she also is unpopular, not seeking any other office across the state. The point is that in Iowa, Donald Trump is hemorrhaging support because his economic policies are really hurting Iowa voters. This is a state that voted for Donald Trump overwhelmingly, and his approval rating in the state is not positive. He won Iowa in the last election by, as much of a margin that Republicans won Texas by. He won by 13 points in this state. And so thinking about 2026, yes, it would be very difficult to see it happen, but it's not impossible. And if Tuesday's results was indicative of anything, it is that sometimes very improbable election results come to fruition. And that would have to be the case for Democrats to win in Iowa, and with it, the U.S. Senate majority. And so that's where we're at. The map here and the math here is not easy for the Democratic Party. No doubt about it, right? It's not something that they can count on or rely on or say that they should expect, because they arguably shouldn't, right? That's not the nature of 2026. But the results on Tuesday showed again that improbable things happen in American politics. Jay Jones outperforming Kamala Harris was not on my bingo card, and certainly not the Democrats in the House of Delegates winning a near supermajority there after being up at just one seat 2 years ago. And so sometimes the wave of the election can carry things much further, and it looks like the real and substantive pathway for the Democratic Party to the U.S. Senate is by winning Ohio, winning North Carolina, winning Maine, holding on to Michigan, holding on to Georgia alongside every other state that they currently hold, and winning one of the three, Iowa, Texas, or Alaska, which could only happen with the right candidates, the wrong Republicans, and the right circumstance, which is no guarantee that happens in a year from now. But it did happen on Tuesday. And if that is indicative of anything, it is that its Democrats have a possibility of winning Senate control. It's not the favorite, but I would stand to reason they are at 20-30% odds with the right candidates running in every single race, which may not be the case. But it does not mean that it is entirely ruled out in a way that maybe 6 months ago I would have said a 0% chance. At least now, Democrats have a fighting possibility, and let's say they get 250. It puts them in great odds at winning the Senate majority in 2028, and if they get the White House and the House, a governing trifecta for 2 years. Not a guarantee again, but something that is certainly possible given our national environment, the anger that Americans face towards the President of the United States and his political party. And many of these states that might have been overwhelmingly Trump states, in the same case we saw in 2018, could find themselves voting with the Democratic Party, just purely out of spite against what Donald Trump and the Republicans are doing in Washington, D.C., as the government shutdown is looming to the longest ever, already hit that record and growing. And what we've seen so far is that these results from Tuesday's election are not good for the Republican Party, and they don't continue to reason that they would be even better in 2026. It just doesn't look good right now for the GOP, and they're going to need to find a way to really turn it around. Otherwise, they might seriously face Democrats not just winning the House, but potentially control of the United States Senate as well. And so thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter at the top left of the screen. There's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2026 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.